used to be a good Christian girl.
brainwashes teens to believe that they're trans.
Oh, let's go social contagion. Wait, are they like all going up there? Holy. Jubilee is back at it again with the transes versus the detranses, and let's get into it, see who's got the best arguments.
Raise your hand if you feel attacked by the opposite side.
What's the chameleon for?
Step forward if you agree with the prompt. Gender-related treatment should be banned for minors.
All right, we're starting off strong.
Medical transition is no place for a child. I transition as an adult, and I have medical complications.
So, to be clear, any kind of treatment is going to have like side effects, potential complications. There are lots of treatments that we routinely give to children. We can go with extreme examples like pediatric cancer, where, chemotherapy can be life-saving treatment for children, even though it can have real serious complications. We can also go with more mild examples like antidepressants or ADHD meds, which are shown to have permanent effects on particularly the brain chemistry of people, even into adulthood. This idea that, well, if there's any kind of like permanent complication or effect, then we can't give that medicine to a minor. We just couldn't perform pediatric medicine if that's the conclusion that we're going to take the logical extreme.
I have mental health issues. Child cannot consent to a medical transition because kids want to eat ice cream every day. It doesn't mean that they should.
So kids want to eat ice cream every day, therefore they shouldn't be allowed to talk to doctors and psychiatrists and therapists. I don't think like anybody here is advocating for like a child to just like walk up to their local pharmacy and be like, I would like 1 testosterone, please. I want big transgender to shoot me up with hormones and give me all that hormone shit. No, like if we're talking about how the system works right now, the WPATH standards, that's the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, requires at least 6 months of continual gender therapy and a gender dysphoria diagnosis to access puberty blockers, let alone cross-sex hormones, and puberty blockers are largely reversible. They would have to continue going to gender therapy for years while they're on the puberty blockers before they could access cross-sex hormones. For lots of medical conditions, we prescribe medicine to kids in way less than 6 months, particularly like antidepressants or ADHD meds. There is a lot more consultation and screening that goes into a trans youth receiving medical transition than any of these other treatments. Yeah, it's not like somebody's just making a decision on their own. This is the decision of doctors and therapists and researchers that are following evidence-based guidelines. And to suggest that we should use authoritarian government measures to override doctors and medical institutions that establish research-backed guidelines is crazy. If you apply that to literally any other treatment, it sounds insane. If some conservative disagrees with the effectiveness of chemotherapy for pediatric cancer, then just ban chemotherapy. That's insane. That's completely insane.
I agree with you on that as well, because we have so many rules and regulations when it comes to tobacco or alcohol or any type of drugs. Driving a car, you can't even rent a motel until you're like 25. There's some specific things that we need to put into place that I think would help protect our children.
Actually, if you're going to use the car example, we give out learner's permits to people who are as young as like 14 years old, kind of depending on the state. I think that in some states you can even go younger with like a farmer's permit, where with the supervision of professionals who are licensed, with the supervision of taking tests, of getting this license, getting this permit, you can in certain circumstances with supervision drive a car. There are lots of regulations we put on these things because of the potential to cause harm, and medical transition is no different. There's lots of regulations and consultation and therapy and psychiatric diagnoses that go into it because of the potential for things to go wrong. That analogy actually applies perfectly here.
Minors themselves really don't know who they are until they become 25, 26 years old.
That's ridiculous. Just that somebody doesn't know who they are until they're like 26 is crazy. Obviously like people are going to experience change in their life, changes in career and things they want to do. To suggest that because the brain isn't fully developed until the age of 26, you can't receive what seems to be shown in the medical literature to be life-saving medical care for the 99% of trans youth who take it and do not detransition is insane. Medical regret's a real problem. I'm absolutely willing to acknowledge that medical regret is a real thing. No medical procedure, even life-saving medical procedures, are going to have a 0% regret rate. We can talk about things like knee replacement surgery, which can be life-saving for people, has a regret rate of almost 20%. And then other things like antidepressants. The typical medical regret rate for various procedures is around like 5 to 12%, kind of depending on the procedure. And the regret rate for medical transition is 1% consistently across numerous studies. It is insane how much better the regret rates are for medical transition than any other procedure we have.
Their minds aren't fully developed, and it kind of breaks my heart a little bit.
So I did transition as a minor. I was a teenager who had a lot of mental health issues and had been sexually exploited and hated my body. And it ended with me finding spaces where that was twisted into, no, you're just a boy in the wrong body. And
How? I don't see how that gets twisted into you're a boy. I don't see the connection. I mean, obviously that's an awful experience, but that doesn't make someone a boy. I don't see how that's connected.
it ended with me having my first ever medical intervention being a double mastectomy at 16, before any hormones, before anything else. And because of transitioning at such a young age, in the past 6 months, I have watched my body fall apart and waste away in front of me. I have constant joint pain. I've watched my muscle mass waste away. I've watched my vocal cords hurt. I don't know if I'll ever be able to.
Wait, what? What? How would their muscle mass waste away if they went on testosterone? Testosterone makes you put on muscle mass. Yeah, there is something to be said about like the vocal folds feeling kind of like some tension as they're expanding due to testosterone. But this is a side effect that like you're told about before you go on the medicine. You gain muscle when you take T. This seems just false. Weird, very weird. Also, if we're talking about like mastectomies, I actually did some research and I found that the majority of cases where we provide double mastectomies, even to minors, the majority of cases is actually intersex men. All of these like legislative pushes to ban gender transition treatments for trans youth have like exempting cases for intersex people. It is mostly intersex men who receive double mastectomies in order to get rid of the boobies that they naturally grow. It is a fact that lots of intersex men happen to grow boobies, and the medical standard practice is that if they don't like those boobies, I mean, first off, power to them. Men with boobies, that's powerful. Own that, my dudes. But for those that are dysphoric about it, they're able to get a double mastectomy with way less consultation and screening than a trans person would need to go through. So it just seems like a really weird double standard why we can have an intersex man with boobies who doesn't like their boobies and gets top surgery at age 15, 16. Consistently, nobody bats an eye. But when a trans man does it, everybody goes crazy. Make it make sense.
To carry a child. The evidence we have suggests that the best way to figure out if gender dysphoria persists into adulthood is to let them grow up.
No. The best evidence we have is to undergo consultation and therapy. It's not just to like not do anything about the problem. She's not going to cite any evidence because it doesn't exist.
Because a lot of these kids will grow out of it, and many of them will just grow up and end up being gay or gender nonconforming.
Why do they always have that exact same talking point that they're just going to be gay and like, oh, they're so afraid of like gay stigma that it made them transgender? Being trans is way more stigmatized than being gay. Like, I never understand when people make that talking point.
Can the disagree a step forward?
I mean, if we're going to be honest, every major medical organization supports.
Yo, is that Samantha? I'm actually oompies with her on TikTok. Hey, my oompies are just popping up.
Gender affirming care for trans youth. They say it's
absolutely do.
safe and it's life-saving. And there are numerous studies that back that up.
The study that backs it up for puberty blockers is the Dutch protocol, and the same
I have 10
scientists.
studies that I can bring to you
The
right now.
same scientists that brought that up have since rolled it back and said it was never supposed to be applied the way it has. The American medical industry, we all know, is money hungry and has gone off the rails.
Also, the money hungry argument is going to apply to literally every medicine in a capitalist society. Should we stop providing treatment for pediatric cancer because chemotherapy makes money? Should we stop giving diabetic people insulin because it makes money? No. Give people life-saving medical care, and at the same time, we can socialize medicine to address that problem.
Agreed that there are definitely some doctors out there that may be taking advantage of trans people, and I'm sorry that you went through this. Truly, I really am sorry. But trans kids are valid, and it's not a decision that they're making.
Right.
It's healthcare.
I want to speak to that real quick. Like, I came out 13 years ago when I was 14, and I knew, not that I was trans, but that I was a boy. I had to go through a lengthy process of therapy and seeing an endocrinologist and like go through different tests and exams to make sure that this was real to everyone else involved. Transitioning and being trans was just a process I went through to become who I always knew I was. It wasn't a like decision that I made. It was a life or death thing for me. And if I hadn't gotten on hormones and gotten surgery at 16, I don't know if I would be here.
As a father, I have 4 kids, and also as a trans person, I think that knowing what it looked like for me as a child, and that experience of going through all of the turmoil and all of the trepidation around my gender identity, I would not put my children in that situation. And also, I don't think that surgeries should be allowed for minors. Like when we look at the data and we look at the statistics and we look at the research, the vast majority of these surgeries are happening to adults. They're not minors. So let's start there, right? And then
Yeah, I think that you can absolutely approach the surgery for minors topic. It's one that's definitely a lot more unintuitive for people. But I think the best example you can do is gynecomastia surgeries for intersex men, because this is a medical procedure that is routinely performed, and conservatives never seem to bat an eye about the gynecomastia surgeries for intersex men. It's rather complicated. I think that, most people would agree that like if a kid has a broken arm, you can do surgery in order to operate on that broken arm. So, okay, there are some surgeries we can allow for minors. Let's work there. Where are kind of the boundaries? I think that the boundary should be delineated at harm. It seems to be the case that, yeah, having boobies can be pretty debilitating for certain trans men. So I wouldn't want the government to put an outright ban on anything, because medicine ultimately should be between doctors and psychiatrists and their patients and their parents. If we're going to be honest, surgeries are overwhelmingly happening at 18 plus because of the long waiting lists they have. Most people who get surgery at 18, they were on the waiting list for years before they were able to get that surgery at 18 even. It is very hard to get the surgery as a minor because of the waiting list of these procedures. We have
further than that, if we look at puberty blockers are reversible. So when it comes to children, when we talk about puberty blockers, that gives them a shot.
Yeah.
And it gives them autonomy over their bodies. It gives them a space that they can explore their expression. They can explore who they are without surgeries, without all of these other things that could have permanent effects. My kids were maybe 8 and 10 when I started my transition. And so I talked to them in kid terms. I told my son, I said, look, your mom, dad wants to be a dad because that's how I feel. And my kids being so young, they understood it. They were like, okay, we're with it, And so as they got older, I
yeah. I know that there are a lot of transphobes that think that it's just so confusing to explain the existence of trans people to kids, but if you explain it using age-appropriate language, they're just like, okay, cool. And that's literally it. Like, if Naomi used to be a boy and now she's a girl, for example, is enough for kids to be like, okay, whatever. Does she still like dinosaurs? Like, that's where kids' minds are at.
Bring them into my world and get them to understand the things that maybe I was going through, but now that they're adults, they understand differences in people. Not just trans people, but people in general.
So there is such thing as gender fluid. How
Yes.
do you know that this kid is not going to change their gender expression later on? We really actually don't have studies on.
Well, if we're talking about somebody who's gender fluid with respect to their gender expression, there wouldn't be a medical intervention there. That would just be a social presentation. If they have a persistent sex dysphoria in addition to their fluid expression, then they can go through the same process of talking to doctors and psychiatrists and therapists. But if it's just a social presentation, then there's no medical intervention that's necessary. We also see that there are lots of non-binary people, for example, who only desire to transition socially, no medical transition that they even desire, and people often try to medicalize everything trans. But for lots of trans people, yeah, it's just about their social presentation, just about the name or the pronouns they go by, how they want to present themselves, etc. And that's no big deal. If a social presentation change, even if it is just a phase, no harm done. I mean, it would be no worse than if somebody had a goth phase, for example. And it's only in those cases where they have persistent dysphoria, which has been medically recognized, that they would receive any kind of treatment. The first line of defense is the reversible puberty blockers.
Children that are taken over long term, over 10 years, 20 years, you've only been on testosterone 14 years. One of the oldest trans men, Buck Angel, he almost died from.
Wait, Angel, one of the oldest trans men? We actually have trans people, including people who had medically transitioned, transsexual people, from the 1920s and 30s is the earliest we have. I know there was an example of this trans man who he was able to medically transition in just I think it was the early 2000s, died at the age of 85, and he was a trans man who had medically transitioned. No, Buck Angel's not the oldest trans man. He's just a generation before.
You're saying right now it saved your life. You may still die from it. You don't know. You're still part of it.
Exactly.
You'll die
an
for
adult, you can
ideology,
make
and
that
a lot of
decision.
people have died for an ideology.
Not an ideology.
But we have
It
more
is.
people that are
Who I am.
dying because
an
they're not
idea that you were
allowed
born
to
in the wrong
express
body.
themselves. Look at the.
I wonder if there's any data on how many people have died from HRT. Actually, we do have the trans mortality study. What they found is that trans people, on average, did experience more death than cis people, but it was due to non-hormone related causes. Essentially, it was due to things like the lower socioeconomic status of trans people on average. It wasn't due to like their hormones killing them.
The suicide rate of transmasculine folks is at 55%. And one of the factors that could save their lives is support. And so if we have folks that are committing suicide because they're not allowed to transition, how do we fix that? If you're telling me the transition for children or minors is something that shouldn't be done.
I am very sensitive to this subject, as I've been the person who has had to talk people off the ledge when it comes to suicidality. The discussion around how we talk about suicide is a very dangerous one in this community. You know, my parents were told, do you want a dead daughter or a living son? That's not an appropriate way to talk about that.
And I understand that, but it is our transmasculine youth.
I understand that.
It can be an effective way to approach the conversation, particularly if somebody is completely adamantly against the idea of transitioning in any circumstance. Yeah, it's absolutely something that you should consider. What would be worse, losing a child to suicide or having a trans kid? In kind of the extreme case, I think that it is something worth discussing, particularly with people who are very resistant to, you know, their own child's identity.
Are at the highest risk
I
of
understand that,
suicide.
and they deserve help, but we also need to have a responsible conversation that is not using suicide as a means to push them down a pipeline before they have that comprehensive care.
So I have a question.
So, Aris, I know you've been wanting to say something.
Yeah, no, because I have a big problem. Oh, yeah, no, so I'm not an interrupter. What I'm going to say is we insult children or youth so much by taking away their autonomy and their own agency over their own decisions and insulting that they know who they are. Like an adult knows who they are more than they do. No one knows who I am more than I do.
Right.
And it's always been that way. I've always known who I was. I've never felt like I was in the wrong body. I just had to adjust my body. And so I think taking away kids' agency and the right to their own body, it's anti-human.
I have a question. Do you believe minors should be able to get tattoos or plastic surgery or consent to the list of other?
So different.
Hold on,
I
let me
understand they
answer
are
this question
different
for
things,
you.
but to what
No, you
level
can't
do
even-
Well, actually, I think this is a question that you absolutely can engage in good faith, and I think that the answer is, well, if it's shown to be something that is going to improve their mental health significantly, such that it results in a much greater mental health outcome, I think that there can be a medical case for it. If we're going to talk about tattoos, I know that there are cases of people who are like covering up scars from various things that, I mean, if this is shown to be a real mental health saver, yeah, I think we can talk about that. The other example is plastic surgeries. We allow kids that have cleft lip, for example, to receive plastic surgery in order to eliminate the cleft lip that they have. Kids are bullied relentlessly for certain like birth conditions that give them atypical bodies, such as a cleft lip. And we routinely allow children to get plastic surgery in order to get rid of those conditions. So I think that there actually is a real conversation to be had there, and the delineation point is, once again, harm. You can absolutely engage in that point in good faith. Yeah, got tattoos to cover up self-harm scars. I think that there's a real case you can make for that. Obviously, the point is that it's not something that we're just going to do frivolously, where any kid that wants any kind of tattoo or plastic surgery is going to say, yes, absolutely. We would have a process of, you know, screening and consultation and research-backed medical guidelines that show that, yeah, okay, if cleft lip surgeries drastically improve the lives of these people, then we should provide them. If, you know, covering up self-harm scars, for example, drastically improves the lives of these people, yeah, I'm open to providing it. That's the kind of the real conversation you can have on that hypothetical.
Make that
No, to what level do we give children bodily autonomy over everything they do? Because here's the thing, children need barriers in childhood development. You need barriers, and they need a safe way to push against those barriers. And I worry with the current medical system that instead of giving them a safe way to express themselves and push against barriers, we have taken some of those barriers away. And that is why you see more detransitioners, because those barriers have been lifted.
Yeah, they're not just doling out surgeries for children. That's not happening
I had a
anywhere.
letter from a therapist in a single visit at the gender clinic office
And
before
that
I
was
had
abuse
the first.
from that therapist who did not
that-
Yeah, that's
psychoanalyze
awful.
the
That
rest of
shouldn't
your
not
issues.
happen.
Right, and that
Yeah,
shouldn't
because
have
your
not
issues
happened
weren't
to you.
being trans. There were a lot of other issues that you're
I have a
addressing right
diagnosis
now.
of gender dysphoria as
And
well.
you shouldn't. You were misdiagnosed.
No, I have one.
Right.
Yeah, you had to get a second opinion. Huh?
Is this person trying to say that they're trans or not? They're really holding on to that gender dysphoria diagnosis. Do they agree that the diagnosis is real, or do they not?
And how was
Can
how was I supposed to do that when my parents were told
That's
that I
not
would
your
kill
fault.
myself?
But your
Yeah, that's not your
parents,
fault.
your parents,
Their biggest crime in all this was trusting a medical system that they thought would help me, and the professionals apparently not doing the right thing
I
here.
understand, but your
Yeah,
parents were
absolutely
responsible for the decisions that were made on your behalf.
I think that what this really highlights is the importance of you sharing your story, because what it shows is that you can't jump into these transitions, and you
Yeah.
shouldn't listen to these doctors that push you to transition just
Nobody
because you're feeling a
should.
certain way.
social media.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach. No, obviously this person was harmed by a misdiagnosis, and that's an unfortunate reality of any kind of medicine we provide. And I want more research to be done. I want more studies to be conducted so that we can minimize that to the best extent possible. Yeah, it's just a sad reality of medicine. 20% of people that get a knee replacement are going to have some regret about it. That sucks, but knee replacements can still be life-saving. And treatment for gender dysphoria is very, very much life-saving for the 99% of trans youth who don't regret it.
Brainwashes teens to believe that they're
Oh,
trans.
let's go social contagion.
I have to agree on that one. Like,
Don't
there's
do it.
this thing about it.
Right.
Like, yeah, there's this play that they have.
I don't think that it necessarily
Wait, are they like all going up there? Holy shit.
brainwashes children, but I think there are a lot of people who get into being queer or trans.
Kind of the main contention point of this topic is that brainwash is a very, very loaded word. But if you're going to talk about, like, does education about the existence of queer identity allow more people to come out as trans? Yeah, that's true. Just like how education about, hey, some people are left-handed, some people are better at writing with their left-handed, will make people who are left-handed be like, oh, I can just write with my left-handed? Yeah, same thing for, like, trans people, but the term brainwash is so loaded. Like, you know, left-handed people weren't being brainwashed into being left-handed, for example.
It's trendy, and I know that's a really controversial statement to
No.
make as a trans person, but I have seen it, I have experienced it. I also find that social media, especially apps like TikTok, give a lot of these kids so much misinformation
Yes.
and lead to people thinking they're trans when there are much deeper issues, and everyone just wants to belong and find an identity, especially when they're young. You know?
I mean, if you just want to, like, belong and find an identity with your young, like, you could just become goth, for example. Like, you don't have to, like, the framing of this is like, you know, people that are just searching for an identity are going to, like, start injecting themselves with hormones and, like, getting misdiagnosed by a doctor over, like, a 6-month consultation period. It just doesn't really follow. There are probably some people out there that might think they're trans, but they're not really trans, that might have discovered about trans people through TikTok. But that's why, you know, for trans youth, we have doctors and psychiatrists and therapists that do months of consultation before they're even given puberty blockers.
I think brainwash is such a strong
Yeah, that's a
word to
very
use
aggressive
there
word. I
when
would
it's
not. That's why I hesitated to step forward.
And that's why
yeah.
I would step in and actually say it's more so of like a social contagion.
It's just, yeah.
No, there actually are 2 studies out there that talked about being trans like a social contagion, and the only evidence they had was these 2 studies surveyed disapproving parents and asked whether or not they believed that their kids had become trans due to a social contagion. Big surprise, transphobic parents said, yeah, I think that this is a social contagion, but none of these studies have actually surveyed or tried to understand the kids themselves. It just proves that transphobic parents are transphobic. It doesn't prove anything else.
What got me to transition in the first place was social media. It had a grasp on me that there could be something else out in the world for me. During that discovery, I played it to the fullest 100%. I even passed as a female for a good, you know, what was it, 6 years out of the 7 that I was a transition. And later down the road, I went and paid out of pocket and talked to just a regular therapist, and she made me start questioning my own existence in a way, what I can do as a human being, not just as, you know, a male or a female, but what can I contribute to the society? And it made me open up to maybe I was born as a male, and it feels empowering to me.
I mean, so it seems this guy probably just needed some therapy. Like, if you have any doubts about your transition, absolutely, get therapy. Therapists can help you talk about that, help you explore your identity, explore what your options are. If you have any kind of uncertainty, therapy is a great place to start. I would never disagree with that.
I was heavy on social media. Like in my transition, Tumblr, that was the place to be for sure. And everyone was talking about their transition from my experience, and everyone was talking about a lot of mental health issues, depression, and all of that. And it was kind of being trendy in that sense. Like when TikTok came out, like that was like a whole nother world. And the biggest thing that I found with that is like they weren't saying a lot of the negative things that were happening in their transition. There was always like a positive outlook on it, like I'm being who I need to be, like this is great.
This is the ticket to your happiness.
Yeah, and
how it's sold.
Like so much on social media, like I made a documentary on my transition and I really went into depth of like a lot of my depression that I dealt with on that. And I didn't find anyone talking about that.
And I personally didn't think I was trans till I saw earlier trans YouTubers. Before I was just gender bending man. And for sure, I also feel like comparing yourself on social media to other people that are more beautiful and successful will create dysphoria of some kind. And some people,
it will affect your self-image for sure.
Because we see all those beautiful trans women that are all dolled up or had every possible plastic surgery they could ever get. You're gonna feel dysphoria. You're gonna be like, I don't look like that.
I mean,
so
that's
I
in
have to go
general
through
though.
steps.
You know what I mean? Whether you're cis
Right.
or trans, everyone
So social media
is
has
dealing
such
with
a-
that
I've
for
fallen into
sure.
that.
It has
looking
such
at,
a
you know,
bad impact on
actors and
mental
stuff.
health.
I wanted to
I think there is absolutely a real conversation to be had about the ways that social media have negatively impacted people's body image and how this has motivated people to get like plastic surgery in lots of ways. Cis people are in no way excluded from that. It's an interesting conversation, and I think it definitely shows that like a lot of people, hey, therapy's a good idea. Never short out on therapy if you have any kind of doubts about this stuff, or if you're considering like, you know, what's my motivation behind this? Is it because I'm really trans? I'm trying to deal with like a dysphoria? Is it because like unrealistic body standards? That's a conversation that's great for therapy. Never be afraid to work it out there.
to be that muscular dude, and I wanted to do
100%.
that. So
No,
yeah,
it is such
Honestly, I think that the conversation of like, you know, plastic surgery in cis women versus facial feminization and surgery in trans women, I think there can be a lot more overlap than people might like to admit. I'm not going to dispute the fact that, you know, for some trans women, facial feminization surgery can be the difference between not passing and passing, and that can have a huge impact on, you know, their lived experience on their lives. But particularly if we're talking about like trans women who they already pass, but perhaps they have like a lot of scrutiny from being on social media, you'll notice that they often get facial feminization surgery in the same way that like a lot of like cis women influencers end up getting basically the exact same surgery, often due to a lot of the pressures that are placed on them being in a very public position. I think that the conversation is more comparable in certain situations than more of like the gender dysphoria as like a hard and separate diagnosis medical condition. This is kind of like the Abigail Thorne discourse about, you know, is gender dysphoria this categorically unique and different phenomenon than any kind of other like dysphoria about having a difference between the body that I currently have and the body I desire. Absolutely, there are cases where certain transition procedures can be the difference between passing and not passing. That can be huge for somebody's everyday social life and just the experience that they have going through the world. But for other people, there absolutely is kind of that tension of, am I doing this to appease, you know, like an online beauty standard versus is this something that I need to do to alleviate dysphoria? I think there's a real conversation to be had there.
It has such a bad, like well-documented bad impact on people's like sense of self and mental health, and so.
But I also really quickly just want to say, like, I don't want people to think that social media is turning people trans.
yeah, we agree with that.
All right, can the disagree step forward?
Yeah, okay, so my thoughts on social media and everyone suddenly looking or being trans. I think whoever is leaning towards that or looking towards being trans for answers was always someone that felt that way or felt some type of way about their gender or their identity or the way they present themselves.
It's at least a pretty strong indicator. But if you have doubts, therapy's a great idea.
They're just gonna go that way. I know plenty of femme twinks who went the muscle queen pipeline. It's not a rare occurrence. And so just experience your life, have fun. Try not to take social media seriously because no one is advertising their failures. It's all fake.
Yeah, but I think it is also important to say that like social media is very, very effective. You know, I mean, I personally scroll on TikTok and I'm like, do I have OCD? Do I have autism? Like all these different things. And like it can suck you in. So it's important to be aware of those things.
I have a question for Samantha, since you have the largest platform here. Do you believe over the years you've inspired people to transition?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think that I've inspired people to believe that it's okay to be transgender, it's okay to express themselves, and that it's possible to live a happy and successful life.
How do you feel about the fact that some of them are going to regret the body modifications they got and going to have like...
I think that they should go to a doctor that is well-versed in gender care and have the appropriate psychoanalytic analysis done beforehand. That's not my problem.
Samantha's on point. She's doing a great job, I gotta say. Very, very rhetorically on point in every other response I've seen so far. Shout out to my oofy Samantha.
I feel like a lot of folks are going to social media looking for possibility models. They're looking to see if they're okay. I know for me, when I was very young, looking to see if there were other people like me, because for a long time I thought that I was
The only one.
exactly.
I thought I was the
right.
only one.
And so feeling like that, like suicide was a thing for me, right? And so when I did see a possibility, Mari, when I did see somebody that looked like me, that put me in a space where I was like, I'm okay.
Sigh of relief.
Right.
I will say there's also a difference from like showing people that you can have a positive life and then telling them what to do. So I think you on your channel are kind of like, hey, look what I was able to do and how this made me feel, versus like, you should do this because I did this.
Right.
So I
And
think
also,
There is actually a difference there, but like, are people saying you are transgender, be transgender, you must transition, go take hormones right now? I really don't see people that are like doing the, oh, you must be transgender, you are absolutely transgender, there is no doubt in my mind. I really don't see that on like TikTok. I'm pretty well versed in the TikTok trans community. Overwhelmingly, I see people that are like, that's a little bit suspicious if somebody's saying some rather trans sounding things, and they're like, you might want to explore this a bit more, you might want to talk to a doctor. I feel like trans people in general are a lot more in kind of the direction of, that's a little sus, you should probably think about that a little bit more.
I try my best to be very upfront
right,
about the
because
issues
we
of
can't help if
transitioning.
someone's going to change their mind on something. Like that's inevitable.
Yeah.
We're humans.
And I have to jump on one more thing with that. Like, if I'm watching her channel and it inspires me to transition, I have been watching white straight men be president for years, and I've not wanted to be president once. So I don't identify with that. If we're going to talk about brainwashing, let's talk about where we see things every single day happening a certain way versus someone just living their life authentically.
Okay, she's brushing up against this discourse. The real brainwashing is big cisgender. So much in the ways that society tells you, oh, well, because you're a girl, you can't like these kinds of activities. Because you're a boy, you can't do, say, ballet or dance. Because you're a girl, you know, science is probably not best suited for you. There is a lot of explicit messaging which happens along these lines, but more so we see a ton of implicit messaging in how these kind of things are advertised very, very subtly. I think that is a very, very much stronger brainwashing on people. Social pressure to conform to gender expectations is way stronger than, yeah, any kind of like trans person who's like, hey, you might be trans. Very, very much stronger. Big cis het. So true.
People with gender dysphoria need therapy, not surgery.
I think the answer is that it depends.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with that one.
I don't.
We all agree.
I think
It's potentially both, though.
Yes.
I think everyone with gender dysphoria needs to go through a therapeutic process and mental health care before they make that choice for themselves.
Exactly.
I personally confused a lot of my gender dysphoria for body dysmorphia because no matter how much I feminize my body, till today I still don't feel comfortable in my own body. And now, like looking among like members of trans community, I see that people keep on getting more and more surgeries. The surgeries are no longer affirming. You can just tell that this person is like struggling with body images. I was able to get on estrogen pretty quickly when I was 22, and my mental health declined afterwards. And I attributed it to being still in the wrong body, needing more body modification, I ended up getting sex reassignment surgery. I do believe that transition was sold to me as a hardware fix for my mental issues that were not addressed. I still struggle with internalized homophobia that pushed me into transition in the first place. I struggle with borderline personality disorder, body dysmorphia, I'm on a spectrum, I'm ADHD, and I have all those issues that were not helped, and I was still struggling with them after transition, and I still do.
I mean, if somebody especially has like body dysmorphia, that's the kind of condition that you're really gonna want to investigate kind of further in therapy before like transitioning. Body dysmorphia in particular is going to have a very, very strong effect on how you perceive yourself and how any kind of like change in your body are going to resonate with you. You know, if you have body dysmorphia, this is absolutely kind of the thing where really want to be working with psychiatrists and doctors who are well versed in body dysmorphia. But hey, you know, if cases like these and we have additional research on these topics that can allow us to better identify, you know, when somebody's experiencing body dysmorphia versus gender dysphoria, if it's possible for these conditions to coincide, which I'm guessing it is possible. Yeah, more research is always going to help us be better at identifying, oh, well, this might be a case where it's just body dysmorphia versus this might be a case where it's just gender dysphoria. The case where, you know, it might be both. The psychiatrist can work to provide the individualized care which is best suited for those people's needs.
Overall, after a few years, I came to a conclusion that I was not in the wrong body, that I'm a gender non-conforming man, and I am a feminine man, that's what I am.
I don't know if you guys have heard, but I've had a lot of binary trans people say that it's not a mental health issue. Like, if you're trans, I know I don't agree with that. Like, I think there's a disconnect between the mind and the body. I guess I'm asking that. Like, it's like, do you think that it's a mental health?
So I think that person, they were assigned male at birth, and then they medically transitioned. But nowadays they identify as like a gender non-conforming man, although they've had like like boob job, facial feminization surgery, bottom surgery is what seems to be the case. Somebody that had untreated body dysmorphia probably should have been talking to more psychiatrists. Seems to be the case.
Disorder. And
I don't
needs to
think
have
being
therapy.
transgender is a mental health
Disorder,
disorder. I think, you know, gender incongruence is what they're referring to it as now. It's listed as a sexual health concern, but the gender dysphoria, which is the symptom that arises when you are transgender, is a mental health concern.
So maybe I'm thinking of, like, that's what I'm trying to say then in a sense.
And then once you are diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and I feel like this is kind of what the prompt is kind of hinting at, if you do have gender dysphoria, the only treatment for that is transition. Whether that be just a social transition, a medical transition, whatever transition fits you, that is the only way to heal your gender dysphoria. When I transitioned, the first thing my mom said to me was, can't you just
Samantha
be
doesn't
gay?
miss.
It hurt hearing that, but and a big reason that she said that was she was afraid of what my dad would think. He's always been very, very conservative, very traditional, you could say. He would make comments about trans people, about gay people growing up, so I always knew that he wasn't necessarily accepting. So when it came down to me transitioning, I said to him, I'm going to do this. Either you're going to be the dad that accepts me and supports me through it, or like goodbye. And he chose to support me, and we're closer than ever now.
And I think a lot of us go through medical transitions to easier go through social transition.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. And so a lot of our folks that do transition and may detransition, both experiences are valid, but also understanding that we're not mentally ill because we're trans.
Yes.
Right? And I think that there should be a psychiatrist or someone within behavioral health to be able to say, okay, you're in the right frame of mind to make this decision. But I want to just make it very clear that trans people are not dealing with mental health because they're trans.
Absolutely.
I disagree. I feel like transgender is definitely, and elderly trans people afford for it to be classified as mental illness, so it's covered by insurance. Otherwise, why are you getting the surgeries to?
Because of
if it's not a
dysphoria.
medical condition?
The dysphoria is a medical condition.
The main contingent here is whether or not it's like a mental health condition versus a mental health illness. There's absolutely kind of like a line between illness, disorder, condition. Typically, the line is drawn at something is considered a disorder if it causes like clinically significant distress or clinically significant disability. For some trans people, you know, the intensity of the dysphoria they experience could perhaps constitute a mental health disorder. It's not to say that being trans is the disorder, but rather the disorder would be the debilitating gender dysphoria that they experience. If somebody does have this kind of mental health condition or disorder, obviously it exists along a spectrum, we want to treat it as best we can, following evidence-based guidelines.
It is, but it's in your head. I would say that you have some kind of mental disorder if you're trying to mimic a stereotype of opposite sex.
Right, but it's not a mimic.
The treatment for this mental illness is to transition.
I have a question though, because I have a gender dysphoria diagnosis, I always have, but I'm still where I am today.
Can I give you my honest opinion? I think that you were probably misdiagnosed.
I don't think I was.
So you do
Feel
have gender
dysphoria in your body?
I certainly do now.
Yeah, me too.
Because of the
you want-
changes
you
that
want-
you
you
made.
Wait, okay. This person, I'm genuinely not understanding. Are they trying to say that they feel dysphoric because they want to be seen as a man, or they want to have a more male body? Or are they saying that they feel gender dysphoria because of the ways that they are dissatisfied with how detransitioning isn't a perfect process? Because it's dishonest to play it both ways, where to say, like, if that's the case, then their original diagnosis of gender dysphoria was a misdiagnosis. But if their point is that as a detransitioner, they have specific medical concerns and mental health needs, then yeah, that's true. But trying to frame it as like the exact same as like a trans person's gender dysphoria is kind of dishonest for the rhetorical goals.
I want to talk about now, but at the time,
At the time,
at the time, I genuinely believed I did. I thought it would save me. And then looking back, I realized that my dysphoria stemmed from some severe trauma that was not handled.
But that's not gender dysphoria. That would be like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. That's not gender dysphoria. I fully believe that she had real issues that needed to be addressed, but it seems those issues were not gender dysphoria. Those issues were trauma-related stress.
And that's why I think that mental health step is so important.
Yeah,
Because I've heard this from several other, mostly female detransitioners who we had some form of bad trauma that spawned gender dysphoria symptoms. And we can disagree about misdiagnosis or something later, but it felt real at the time for me.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it did. I didn't mean
And
that.
no, I know.
malicious way.
And it's one of those things where that's where the mental health treatment really needs to come in and get to the root of that issue, because oftentimes, specifically with the detransitioners I've talked to, that was ignored. I came out to my parents in a mental health facility after telling the therapist that I thought I was transgender. And she told me we had to tell your parents so that way you can get the help you need. It led to me seeing a gender therapist who, the issues I was facing were never addressed. To this day, no one ever addressed the fact that I had severe trauma an exploitation going on as a young teenager. Instead, I was kind of just affirmed in, you believe this, and instead of even just a little pushback, it led me to the point where the very first medical intervention I ever had was a double mastectomy at 16.
I don't think that necessarily like pushback is what you want to do in order to best care for like people who might not genuinely benefit from a transition. Kind of like if somebody comes to a doctor with, say, depressive symptoms, and they're like, I'm feeling really depressed. It's not the doctor, the doctor can't do the best psychiatry possible if they're just like, no, you're not depressed. I don't think you're actually really depressed. What they should do rather is acknowledge that those feelings are real and you know, affirm that, yeah, I believe that's what you're experiencing, but then try to get to the why behind those. You can get to the why behind those without saying, no, you're wrong. Having this environment where you feel like you're actually being listened to, where you feel like you're actually being understood is the best way to be in a safe, exploratory environment to get to the root of why you're feeling those things. If a psychiatrist were to just give you pushback, you might act in defiance, where if somebody's like, no, you're not really trans, you would be more likely to be like, well, screw you, I'm gonna go see somebody else. But if this, you know, psychiatrist is working with you and they find, you know, there's some other root issues, you can explore, you know, like, how is this root issue affecting you? Why are you like identifying this way? Has this shaped how you identify? Have you thought about how things might be different if this were different, or you know, if kind of you didn't feel that feeling anymore? How do you think you would feel? Getting them to explore their identity is the best thing you can do, and you need to have a safe and at least acknowledging environment in order to do that.
A few months after that, I started testosterone because it was the next step of what I was supposed to do.
God intended for there to be only two genders.
Whoa, okay, that's a wild prompt to put up on a Jubilee. So I'm actually excited to see this conversation because I know quite a bit about the religious arguments for transness. Because I used to be a good Christian girl.
As a Christian, I truly believe that God created male and female, and he created that throughout life, throughout the nature, throughout the wildlife, throughout...
He is citing the Bible verse where it's in like the early Genesis chapters, it says that God made male and female. Now, if you'll notice, what's really interesting about those Genesis chapters is if you read it like line by line, essentially it's describing all of these spectrums that exist in reality using binary language. So it says, for example, God created night and day. But that's not to mean that, you know, dawn and dusk don't exist. It says that God created land and sea. That's not to say that estuaries, beaches, swamps don't exist. God created all of these. It uses binary language to refer to the spectrum of everything in between. Yeah, light and dark, all these other examples. And so when it says that God created male and female, well, he also created intersex people. And if you look at the source text of like the Talmud, it actually describes 6 different sexes that were legally and socially recognized and had associated gender roles and gendered expectations. Even just looking at the source text, it is explicitly stated that there are at least 6 different sexes and genders that are recognized.
Earth itself, and then the arguments come up into the ocean sides of, well, there's these asexual creatures and stuff like that. Well, they were designed that way for a reason, and we humans were not designed to, we were designed to procreate and be able to bring life back to the earth, because we live and we die, we live and we die. It's a rotation of a process of life in itself, and it's its own journey. So I truly do believe that there is male and there is female, but I can respect people's choices. However,
does he believe that intersex people exist? I just genuinely want to know.
That's where I stand on it.
Well, I'm not Christian, but I do believe there's only 2 biological sexes, and somehow that's how it's been designed, whether it's by higher power or by evolution. I do believe gender expression has been on a spectrum for centuries. We do have references to people who've been cross-dressing. We have references to eunuchs. And as somebody who went through transition and detransition, when I started taking testosterone, it's almost like reminded me of my original blueprint. And I feel like I went against my original blueprint and I did a lot of damage to it, and I just cannot...
Yeah, it's because you started experiencing dysphoria because you're not really trans.
I'd go back to who I was, because without my testicles, I'm just too far gone in my transition. So that's where I'm at.
Can they disagree a step forward?
Yeah, you know, we have historically spent more time focusing on and celebrating several genders.
True.
There are several different cultures throughout the world that celebrate the different genders, and to negate the fact that they exist and to negate their validity is just wrong.
There are as many intersex people as there are redheaded people on the planet. I can name 12 people off the top of my head who are born intersex. So to pretend like there's man and woman is just erasing an entire group of people. The God you speak of, the first God that intersex people get to meet is the doctor, because it's up to their discretion of just what you're gonna be when they mutilate their body to be a man or a woman, and that is not fair.
Right.
Right, and I think also gender and male and female is not the same
Biological
thing.
sex are different things.
Yeah, we're talking about gender, which is like gender identity, the social aspects to being a man or a woman. But male and female dictate sex, so like body parts.
I disagree with the having sex and gender being two different things.
Okay,
I
well,
believe
that's a
them to be
fact.
one. So I believe that there is.
Samantha's not taking
they're
any
the
bullshit.
Same. They're one and the same. They're not different, but we have evolutionary problems within the humanity, because I also see that there are intersex animals that do exist, and that's how they're born. But I also do believe that the initial design was for man and woman, and then somewhere along the way, viruses, mutations, diseases, plagues.
Is his argument actually that original sin created intersex people? That's fucking terrible. Actually, it's even like ancient Judaic tradition that Adam was originally created intersex by God, and then God used the female portion of Adam to create Eve. Yeah, that's very yikes. No, intersex people are just people. There are plenty of intersex conditions that have no negative impact on life expectancy, on mental health. Most of the negative outcomes that are associated with being intersex are because of unnecessary medical intervention that's performed on intersex babies without their consent. That's due to societal stigma and pressure around conforming to a sex binary that does not exist in objective reality. Problem society, not like being intersex, for example.
All that type of stuff that we have in the world does play a part back onto the world itself, but I believe the initial intent was for God to create Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. I'm just gonna.
That's the anti-gay slogan, my dude. Dude's mixing up his slogans. Adam and Steve would imply that there's only one sex or one gender. Dude, you use the homophobic slogan, not the anti-trans one. Holy shit, he's dumb.
That's homophobic.
I know it sounds homophobic, and I understand.
No,
I'm hitting.
it is
Homophobic.
That's okay.
Homophobia made me transition, and that's what you're perpetuating right now. I grew up in a very homophobic family, and since I was a kid, I was always brainwashed, said gay is bad. My parents...
What kind of homophobic parent is going to be like, oh, you're trans? No way. Now you've cured the gay, and we love you again. What homophobic parent is pro-trans? I have never seen this.
Were not happy that I was naturally feminine. They always tried to make me more masculine. They tried to give me to masculine sports. I was mercilessly bullied at school for my femininity, constantly being told that I'm not a real man, that I'm a sissy. And when I came out to my parents as gay, they took me to therapists and tried to do pretty much conversion therapy on me, which failed.
They would do the same thing if you came out as trans. Homophobic parents do not support trans people. I do not get where this reasoning comes from.
So I don't believe in God. I believe in people that exist right in front of me, and I believe they should have the right to exist. And so
I'm not saying they don't have the right to exist. I'm
no,
just
but
saying,
I'm just saying
that was the
they weren't
initial
mistakes
intent.
either. They're just here the way you and I are here right now, and they are who they are, and we have to accept people as they are.
Right, and there are biological differences in trans folks when we look at the brainstem. You know, our brainstems are different. Like
Neurologically.
Right, neurologically, we're different.
Yeah,
and
male
so
and female are different, exactly.
Trans people are different.
Yes.
They've found a distinct difference in the
white matter.
cortex.
There is no biomarker for trans. Some brain scan of some gay males is identical to female brain, but there is no biomarker for trans. Please don't spread misinformation.
There is science that hints towards it. It's just not confirmed.
No,
Well,
there's
confirmed,
research that
So
is out
therefore,
there
it falls
that
under the belief that there is, but there is no scientific fact to back that up, which therefore I believe that God's...
We want to talk about the actual science of trans brains. Brains exist along a spectrum. That's true. And it's a spectrum that's a lot more complicated than just like even like a continuum, where it's not like we have male brains over here, female brains over here, and then there's like non-binary brains in between. It really doesn't work like that. It's a lot more, we observe these kind of brain characteristics are more often observed in female people. These kind of brain characteristics are more observed often in male people. Some brain characteristics deal with like sexuality, it seems. A lot of like kind of the size differences or the difference we observe between male and female brains has to do to the physical size difference between them because of testosterone, because of male puberty. People who undergo a male puberty, they end up with a bigger brain on average. And so that accounts for like a lot of the differences we see on average between male and female brain differences. But even accounting for all of these different brain size differences, even accounting for the sexuality differences, there still are some unique brain characteristics we observe on average being more like the gender and the sex that a trans person is transitioning to or identifies with than the one that they were assigned at birth. There's something there. A lot of the people that, talk about this research, it is overestimated to an extent, but there's something going on there, is what it seems to be actually the case.
Initial intent was to create male
I
and
think
female.
if God intended to, if God exists and in the way that you believe and just intended to make male and female, then we wouldn't be sitting here. I believe
Intersex
in,
people wouldn't
in
exist.
a higher power, right, of my own, and God is not this thing that creates rules and binary situations and laws that can be broken or really made. We're just all here.
Yeah.
Like I was born in a female body, but
Sad that nobody here has the knowledge of like the Talmud and recognizing 6 different sexes and genders legally and socially. That's just like it's the ultimate winning piece of evidence on this conversation, because it's explicitly in the Talmud. It's in the Mishnah Bikram. You can look it up. They describe 6 different sexes that also have associated genders that are recognized legally and socially.
I was never a girl. Never. Ever. Ever. I can't explain why.
And when I say that there's like 6 different sexes, just to be clear for anybody who's like not really in the know, essentially they had kind of like a traditional kind of male sex, traditional kind of female sex, and then they had like 4 different categories of like intersex conditions to varying extents that they classified differently. It shows that, this kind of binary classification was not how they used to view it. They recognized and acknowledged that intersex people exist.
My truth, that is the fact, that is who I've always been, and there's no way that I'm gonna look up at this guy at some guide and be like, oh yeah, you made me as a mistake.
Transitioning improved my sex life.
True.
Not to say that my sex life was bad before, but I think transitioning and coming into my body and feeling comfortable in my skin allowed me to open up more and allowed me to not only be better in bed, but also explore what my sexuality looks like.
Yeah.
Being trans also like made sex really complicated for me too, because I'm a straight guy and I pass very well, and majority of the women that I've been with, I would have to eventually kind of like break it to them that I was trans and deal with a lot of rejection. And with somebody, I would never let girls touch me or see me without clothes on. Not having a penis made me feel inferior as a man, and that no one would want me, which is why I like rejected that part of myself and never even let it be loved. It took a lot of really accepting that people were going to accept me and be attracted to me and love me and want to give me pleasure regardless of what was in my pants. And that took a long time. It took until I was like, I think I was 21, when my ex-girlfriend and I started dating. From that point on, I realized that just letting someone love me was half the battle. And once I let that piece come into play, I mean, it changed my life.
Absolutely. No, I think that for a lot of trans people, like approaching sex before transition can be very weird, both in like dysphorias around body parts, both in around like not being, the type of person you want to be while you're having sex. After transitioning, it is a world of difference, and all kind of like the sexual sensations and feelings and pleasures, the way that your body experiences attraction is influenced by hormones. It's very fascinating. I love how hormones have changed my sex life, and I love the feminine penis. We all love our got girlies out here.
So even though I detransitioned, in the beginning, especially when I was on hormones, like it increased my sex drive a lot, and there were a lot of aspects to that was like enjoyable to explore my fluidity for sure. I was able to date a lot of people, and I think like
testosterone will do that to you. There's always the joke about like trans boys starting tea, and now they're like, when am I going to leave Kingdom Come?
From detransitioning, it's like the opposite of that. Like my sex drive completely changed. There's good aspects to not being horny 24/7. It helped me be more comfortable in my body, even with detransitioning, which sounds weird, but having a trans male body was like so different from the norm. So like I had to accept certain parts of myself. So like even with detransitioning, it helps me accept like certain parts of myself that I don't have still.
Absolutely.
Yeah, valid.
I did identify as a gay man before I transitioned. And like those relationships, I feel like I always kind of had like out of body experiences when we were like intimate. And even after I transitioned, before I had bottom surgery, I just like the anxiety and the dysphoria that I would feel whenever I was intimate, or like a partner would try to be intimate with me, was just like crippling.
Yeah.
So then when I had surgery and I felt more affirmed in my body, and everything it feels right to me now, I'm finally able to have those intimate connections with people and form those deeper bonds. So it's really helped me a lot.
I'm so happy for you. That's amazing.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course.
When I came out as trans when I was 18, I moved to Miami, and it wasn't until I got my gender-affirming surgeries where I was where I did lose my virginity, because I was just not comfortable doing that. I was like, I'm not presenting in my best light, and I think I could get there.
Yeah, for me it was like I'm not fitting the role that I'm supposed to play in this relationship.
No, it's
Aw, it's really great to hear all the positive experiences people are having after like surgical transition. But I gotta say, we need to get a got girly up there. We need to get somebody who loves the feminine penis, because there are a lot more trans people today who are able to recognize that, like, hey, maybe I only want to transition with hormones. Maybe that's all it takes to really cure my dysphoria. Power to them. Girl cock is awesome.
Yeah, it felt weird,
absolutely.
and you also attract a different type of partner. Back in my day, I used to attract what we call a chaser. Versus someone who was genuinely attracted to the female form, which is someone who I wanted to, that's the role I felt. And so that's where I was comfortable. And now I'm comfortable. In Virginia, Virginia, the T word did not exist. That was on Jerry Springer and Maury Povich, and that's where that stayed. No one was trans. And so I transitioned when I was about 18. I moved to Miami, and my joke is that I hit the tarmac and I said, I'm a woman, by the way. I remember I came out to my mom, and I was super nervous because I'd come out as gay years and years before, because that was so much easier. But when I came out, I remember my mom just asked if I was happy, if I was healthy, and if I was gonna finish school, because she had already paid for it. And I said yes.
Face mom.
Disagree a step forward?
Transition definitely ruined my sex life. I was fine with my penis, but a year after estrogen, I felt like that part didn't belong on me anymore. So I went ahead and had sex reassignment surgery. After that, my sex drive was gone pretty much. I kept on having complications. I wasn't able to keep my neo-vagina open despite rigorous dilation. I had multiple revisions, including colon vaginoplasty. I just got some of my sex drive back last year when I started detransitioning with testosterone, but it's kind of traumatic to have male sex drive back without my penis. Also, I want to say that sexuality is
So the trans men in the room over there can relate to that a bit.
fluid. My sexuality has definitely changed once I lost my testosterone. Before, I was strictly attracted to men. After I lost my testosterone, I was attracted to people in general, because now I didn't have this male sex drive, so I couldn't relate to men as much. As I wanted to have sex, but I just wanted to hold hands and cuddle. And now my body dysmorphia / actual gender dysphoria as well is worse than ever before. I do feel like I'm stuck in a surgically created body. I just don't think I've been really myself by trying to become a woman. Yeah, so transition did take a lot from me.
Must be really, really hard. Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
If you had found the results that you desired in the beginning, would you feel differently than you do now?
No, because I realized I just miss being a man, I just miss being obsessed about sex and money. I don't want to do the whole emotional thing. And I'm talking about stereotypes, okay? So I regret, it's just now I'm a medical patient for life. Also, having sex drive back, it just reminds me that I lost all these years. I could have been having fun, whether it's chasers or, I definitely have internalized homophobia. So internalized homophobia also pushed me into transition, because I felt like chasers weren't good enough, because I wanted to be a woman. I wanted to escape my homosexuality.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that this person had a lot of other severe mental health issues that really need to be addressed. And it's unfortunate they didn't get the appropriate, medical mental health care that they needed. But not to say that that's the experience of every trans person, because it seems to be the case that their experience was very, very different and influenced by lots of mental health issues.
But now I realize at the end of the day, I'm a gay man, and I'm still living with internalized homophobia, because therapists actually never helped me with that.
It's fascinating that you say that, because I dated men and women, and in my transition, I felt like I had an internalized homophobia when I was with men, because I didn't feel like a gay man. And that was really hard for me to figure out, because I had this journey for so long, and a lot of sexual experiences were good, but I was on Grindr and I'm sleeping with these men, and they're treating me how I would want to be treated in a social setting, but I'm like, I was really, really masculine in my presentation, but I tended to be kind of feminine in my roles within sex. I think that also
I mean, like bottoms exist.
got me to realize that I wanted to detransition because it was a reflection of the relationships that I had. Like, to follow kind of some stereotypes, like I did miss being a woman in some of those like social settings, like with how.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to be a woman and a bottom, then be a woman and a bottom. But if you genuinely want to be a man and a bottom, that exists. Yeah, there's like twinks, there's like hello princesses. Yeah, lots of gay bottoms exist.
Women interacted with me with how men interacted with me, like. So yeah, that's heavily relatable to that for sure. So I do not regret my transition. Shocking, I know. That was like a really great time for me in the beginning. I really was able to explore and express myself in ways that I could not have done without hormones and surgery. I learned so much about how people treat people based on gender and looks in general. I feel like I would not be the person, especially the confidence and security that I have within myself if I didn't transition as presenting as a woman in this world. My dynamic with...
That's a really healthy perspective. Yeah, power to this person. You know, detransitioners like her having a real conversation about, you know, it wasn't right for me, but I recognize that it shaped the person I am today and that I want people to ultimately get the best care that they need. That's a totally valid perspective. Very, it's also like a very emotionally mature response to her situation.
Men in general is so much different. I mean, I was very insecure, very submissive, very quiet, and now I'm able to speak up for myself because of that.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say, during my transition, I didn't actually have a high sex drive from the hormones, and ever since I came back, my sex drive has been higher ever since, and I think it's because I'm no longer on the estrogen. My testosterone levels are increased after I changed.
Typically, testosterone is going to have a stronger like libido effect than estrogen will. Although if you are a trans girl, going on progesterone tends to skyrocket your libido. I'm on 200 milligrams progesterone now, and my libido came back with a burning passion, stronger than ever, especially after going on progesterone. It's insatiable.
Changed back to being who I was originally born as, and it also kind of opened up my eyes to say, maybe I wasn't really a female. This is probably what I would like my future spouse to have, to look upon it. And I'm proud that I actually have that sex drive back again, because I felt like I lost it for a long time.
The LGBTQ plus community is not as accepting as they claim.
It really depends. It really depends. I'll see how they get into it, but there are some certain forms of gatekeeping that I think are rather harmful. I'm interested how they're going to approach it, though.
Musical chairs.
Musical chairs?
Yeah. I'm embarrassed to agree. That is true information.
There's still so much transphobia within the LGBT people in the LGBT community that hasn't been addressed yet.
Shoot, there's transphobia within trans people.
Absolutely. When I was
Transmedicalist would be the other really big example. Yeah, I'd say that like Kelly's pretty transphobic, for example.
transitioning in high school, I searched for acceptance from the cis hetero world, and now I feel like I'm doing the opposite and searching for acceptance from my own community half the time. Like when I was in college, the queer community on my campus hated me because I did heteronormative like guy stuff. I played lacrosse, I was in a frat, but like I wasn't that guy, I guess, that they had in their head. And every time I would go to the LGBT club meetings, I would get like they would stare into my soul, like I was just this awful thing. And it's always just made me feel invisible and small in whatever space I'm in. And I find that just really disheartening.
And it happens in a lot of other cultures and communities as well too. So
it's funny that you
just happens.
You mentioned like the transitioning in high school part and like that shift from searching for acceptance outside and then turning around and then having to search for acceptance within the community.
Yeah.
Because I did notice that when I was still living as a trans man, when I passed really well, all of a sudden it was like I wasn't welcome in these spaces anymore. Until they knew, and then you get that icky feeling of like you only want me here because of that. And you know now I have the detrans aspect where no community wants me, no one. Like I'm still part of the I'm part of the LGB part, but I've lost people that I thought they liked me for me and it didn't matter what I was. But then all of a sudden detransitioning was the thing that I've been called a traitor I've been,
Me too.
you know,
It's very complicated. You can absolutely recognize that, there are detransitioners who they recognize that it wasn't right for them, and they can absolutely still be gay as well, and be welcome in queer spaces. The real problem comes when a detransitioner tries to weaponize their detransition against other trans people, which I see far too common. But I know there are examples of like detransitioners who are out there that they're supportive of the trans community because they just recognize that that wasn't them, and that's okay. I know, for example, like Lady is Detrans over on Twitter. She is somebody who's a detransitioner who doesn't weaponize her detransition against the trans community in any way, and she seems to have very good relations with trans people in general. It's really difficult, and if these data detransitioners, genuinely have ways they can help influence, getting better diagnostic screening criteria and providing better trans healthcare, getting involved in studies and that kind of stuff, I'm all for that. And I think that there is definitely a propensity for people to be like overly harsh towards detransitioners. I just hope that nobody's going to weaponize their experience against the other side. We can kind of be productive about like how we can perform the best medicine possible, for example.
no, it's,
Me too.
they don't want me. The rest of the world doesn't want me.
That's not true. That's not true.
It can
We
often
want you.
feel that way. It can feel isolating.
But it feels
that
really
way.
isolating. Like, this is not a club.
It's not a
know,
club.
and it's not like a personality trait that I'm just taking up, and God forbid one day I'd change my mind.
Honestly, if she went to like a queer community group and she's like, oh, I'm a lesbian, I don't think anybody would say that, like, get out. There's lots of like queer community groups who are just like, anybody could be gay, non-binary, trans. They tend to be very welcoming.
I won't, but or something happens where I have to detransition, I would hope that the people who stood by my side through everything else would still be there for me because of who I am, period. And not because of an effing label over my head.
And even when I transitioned, I dealt with the traitor to everyone. It was, oh, you want to be a man and the patriarchy. And I was like, I get it, but also.
Oh yeah, that's true. The traitor rhetoric is often weaponized against trans men quite a bit in kind of like transitioning discourse.
Also, yeah. But what I found very interesting was like this divide between trans men and trans women. When I first started doing a lot of advocacy, I was told that just being in the space, that I was taking up too much room, that I was taking up too much space and don't speak and all of these things. And I was like, wait a minute, but I'm trans too, right?
Yeah.
This community also belongs to us too.
Right.
So that was something that I grappled with for a while.
Hung out with a lot of gay women, and then when I transitioned, I definitely lost my space there, and that was like really hard for me to navigate because being shunned out of these female spaces for me was really hard and difficult. And then when I got to the trans male community, there was a lot of competition. Who looked the best, who passed the best, like that was very difficult.
Men being competitive? Oh my gosh, who would have thought?
Shoot, fortunately I had a full beard, so it was like an easy, like, you know what I mean? Like, but still, like, I heavily resonate with trans men still, and I definitely resonate with trans women from detransitioning and gender non-conforming people. So it's like, where do I belong?
Weird position to be in because it's like one community, like I said, doesn't really want you, but you don't fit in. You can't really go all the way back, so you don't fit in with the rest of them.
It's ultimately like these systems of enforcing a gender binary that does not exist in objective reality, these systems of enforcing a sex binary that does not exist in objective reality. Obviously, we know it hurts trans people, but it hurts intersex people. It hurts detransitioners. I want to build a world that is accepting of people with diverse bodies, with diverse gender expression, and that's going to be the most welcoming, accepting world for everybody, be they trans or non-binary or intersex, even cis people too. Like this strict enforcement of gender roles, that hurts cis people. Like this is the reason why men are way less likely to go to therapy for issues that they're experiencing. They're told that they need to suck it up and not cry and never show emotion, and this has a real impact that's shown in studies to be related to the reason why men are afraid to get therapy. Big gender is harmful for everyone, and let's just build a more welcoming society. I think that one was more productive than a lot of the Jubilees that I've seen in general. We had a bit of like the drill and talking points at like the very beginning, but after that it was a lot more productive. Samantha was on point constantly. Very solid, very solid. It was actually good to see like an honest detransitioner perspective from Aaliyah. So much of like the discourse on detrans people is motivated by people who have dedicated their life to weaponizing their detransition against every trans person, or like the Ollie London grift, for example. But yeah, there are honest detransitioners out there,